Now, Republicans are at least trying to narrow who gets more money, while Democrats, of course, are trying to up the ante. Not surprising, I'm sure, but you know what would also solve most of the economic problems families are facing right now? Reopening our shuttered economy. Small businesses can at least expect some relief in the form of more forgivable Paycheck Protection Program loans. Now, once the Senate unveils their counterproposal to what House Democrats have already passed, the pressure's on. But again, how long is this type of temporary fix sustainable for? Joining me now from Washington, D.C., representing Kentucky's 4th Congressional District, Congressman Thomas Massey. Nice to talk to you again, Congressman. So last time we were in this situation, you ultimately attempted to stand in the way of that $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus package. Congress finds itself in that same position again. It'll likely pass. Are you on board this time around?
Well, I said back in March, this is like a blood transfusion to a patient who's bleeding. We're not stopping the bleeding. And back in March, I was told that the reason this is a $2 trillion bill is so we never have to come back and vote on another one of these again. Well, of course, we voted on one more since then, and this will be the third one of these bailout provisions that we pass here in Congress. So the things that we were told in March aren't true. And by the way, back in March, really I just wanted people to show up for work and go on the record when they voted on that, because I thought it was a big mistake. Many of the things that I said about the lack of accountability for the money that's going out the door, we've come to see that's true. Dead people have received over $1 billion of checks. Planned Parenthood received loans from the bailout package, and I'm worried that we haven't even spent all the money that we authorized before, and now we're trying to shove some more out the door.
Right. Initially, there was some Republicans that were saying, let's see how that first round pans out before you go to that second round, but it seems like that idea has sort of been thrown out the window. So what do you see as the biggest flaw in this next stimulus package?
Yeah, so, there's several flaws in all of the stimulus packages. For instance, they waste money, they're not paid for, they increase the debt. But really the biggest flaw of the previous package, which I hope we don't do in this package, and I know there's some effort in the Senate to avoid doing that, is to encourage governors to keep their economies shut down, to encourage people to not go to work. That was the biggest flaw in the prior package. And now in this package, at least there's some effort to get the incentives correct. Instead of paying people more to stay home than to work, and instead of just sending money to the schools, maybe send money to the schools that open up.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Do you think that there is some sort of middle ground where some balance could be struck to incentivize people to get back out there and work, but also help those families that might need that extra little help right now?
Well, one incentive that's not really aimed directly at families, but I think is important to getting the whole economy back on track and getting families back to work, is the liability provision that Senator McConnell's trying to get in there, which is to say, if you have a small business and somebody comes in there and they claim either an employee or a customer, to make it so that you wouldn't go bankrupt, that your business wouldn't go out of business because somebody sued you merely for being open. I think that's an important provision, especially for the smaller companies that could be sued out of existence. I put something on Twitter today. I said, if we're going to let people take early money out of their 401ks, why not let them take early money out of their Social Security? So think about that. Instead of borrowing from our children's future, why not borrow from our own future?
Right. So taking on a little bit more of that responsibility as opposed to relying on others. So what is your biggest fear? Let me ask you this. What's your biggest fear about the path that Congress is taking right now in choosing to handle the virus the way that they are and the way that they're choosing to help the American people? Like you said, you heard one thing in March that clearly didn't stick. So what's your biggest fear moving forward?
My biggest fear is that we're encouraging the governors to keep their economies shut down, and that they will keep their schools shut down, and our economy can't get back to work, that we won't actually find a cure for the virus. But the money that we're spending bailing out the economy, we should be spending on a Manhattan Project to figure out actually how does this virus spread. Can you believe we're still debating whether masks work and what kind of medicines might work and how the virus, if it mutates or not, and do you have antibodies and how long do they last? We should have had so many of those questions answered, and we haven't.
Right.
And so my biggest fear really at the end of the day is that this goes on through the election, that what we're doing here in Congress drags this out instead of getting us to a conclusion, and that every state in the union does mail-in ballots, and that there's fraud in the elections, and that we lose the White House over this virus. That's one of my bigger fears as well.
Mm-hmm. And that's a valid fear. I'm sure you're not the only Republican with that fear right now. I want to read this for our viewers also. This stuck out to me. You recently tweeted a prediction that you made from back in March, and you said, quote, "The greater harm to society is a public's unquestioning acceptance of the unchecked authority of governments to force private behavior and disrupt economies. When this is over, I fear FDR's internment of Japanese Americans is going to look like a light touch." Can you explain what you mean?
Sure. I thought back in March that the government was going to go where it's actually gone, and here we are. They're basically crushing people's civil liberties. The governors have now become tyrants within their own states, and what FDR did, he argued, well, it was for the good of society. We've got to take away these people's liberties and intern them, take away their freedom to move because they were worried about maybe they were spies, and everybody looks at that as a dark part of our history. Well, I think this is an even darker part of our history. Our governors are basically doing what FDR did to Japanese Americans. They're doing it to all Americans, not just the sick Americans. And so I think that's what I meant at the time, and that's what we're coming to see. And then also people are becoming conditioned. At first they were told 15 days to stop the spread. They were to flatten the curve. Well, now that's all gone out the window, and this is evolving. And now some of my colleagues here are saying you're going to have to wear the mask until we've completely eliminated the virus and until everybody's got a vaccine. And I think that's dangerous.
Well, yeah, it seems like the goalpost keeps changing, and anytime someone in your position looks back to history and points something out that there's a parallel, sometimes people are reluctant, oftentimes I should say, to acknowledge that, which is perplexing, I guess, to say the least. Okay, but I do want to switch gears a little bit since I have you here in the time that we still have. So there's been some other headlines brewing in your state of Kentucky. There's a couple from Kentucky that was court ordered to wear an ankle monitor, at least one of the individuals in this couple, after testing positive for COVID. I mean, how is that constitutional? How is this happening?
Well, I mean, these were responsible adults. They were told to stay home, and they intended to do that. But then they were told to sign documents that said they wouldn't go anywhere without asking the government's permission. And that's when they objected. That's when 5 cars and all these people showed up and put ankle monitors on them. Now, if there is a constitutional way to do that, it has to involve the legislative branch. Our governor in Kentucky is just making this stuff up on the fly, and I think it's blatantly unconstitutional, just by the Kentucky Constitution, but the federal or U.S. Constitution says that every state will have a Republican form of government. That means you're going to have 3 branches of government. Our governor, if he wants to keep making all these rules and that have the effect of law and locking people up, he needs to call our legislature back in and have a vote on it.
And I wonder if those might be a part of his plans moving forward as this story continues to gain traction and gain more attention. But I'll have to end it there. Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jennifer.